This is the reason a piece of dark, infected wood from Southeast Asia trades for more per gram than gold, more than platinum, and in rare cases, more than almost anything else on Earth. The material is called oud, and at the highest grade, it has sold for over $10,000 per gram, which explains why one of the rarest substances on Earth keeps ending up inside the perfume bottles sitting on your dresser. Everything starts with a tree called Aquilaria, and across Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Malaysia, there are 21 known species growing in the wild. Healthy trees offer nothing of value because the wood stays pale, light, and completely odorless, which means that without outside interference, it is essentially worthless. That changes when damage occurs, whether from animals, lightning, or insects, and that's when a specific mold called Pheoacromonium parasitica can invade the heartwood and trigger a response that takes years to fully develop. The tree reacts by flooding the wound with a dark, oily resin, and over time, that resin slowly spreads through the wood, turning it black, dense, and intensely fragrant. Decades can pass before the process completes, and what begins as plain timber becomes something entirely different. That resin-filled wood is known as Agarwood, and once it is distilled into oil, the market gives it a different name, oud. Rarity drives the first part of the price, and the numbers explain why. Research cited in Frontiers in Plant Science places the figure between 7 and 10%, which means only a small fraction of wild Aquilaria trees ever develop agarwood naturally. Because the wound must occur, the right fungus must invade, and the tree must survive long enough for the resin to mature. Sometimes that maturation takes 20 years, sometimes 50, and in extreme cases it stretches beyond 100, which limits supply before the wood is even harvested. Conservation pressure adds another layer, and the situation has tightened steadily over the last decades. 4 Aquilaria species now sit on the IUCN Red List as critically endangered. 1 is classified as endangered, and 9 more are listed as vulnerable, while wild populations have dropped by more than 80% over the past 150 years. Since 2005, every commercial Aquilaria species has been protected under CITES Appendix 2, which means international trade requires permits, and that alone restricts how much can legally move across borders. Demand has not slowed. A study published in Global Ecology and Conservation in March 2025, conducted by researchers at Kadori Farm and Botanic Garden, found that roughly 70% of the global agarwood trade still depends on wild, threatened trees. And for one species, Aquilaria filaria, 97% of supply between 2010 and 2020 came directly from the wild. Ian Thompson, an agarwood trade expert quoted by Mongabay, explained that without stronger enforcement and better population data, the decline will continue. The journey from wood to perfume oil explains the next part of the price. Foragers or plantation workers identify infected trees and carve out the dark, resin-rich heartwood by hand, separating it from the pale wood that holds no value. And that alone requires experience and time. Once collected, the agarwood is crushed and placed in water, where it stays for days or even weeks. And a study published in Procedia in 2015 found that oil yield peaks at around 14 days of soaking, which is where the process reaches its most efficient point. Distillation follows, and this is where time becomes cost. The soaked wood is placed into copper or stainless steel stills, steam is forced through it for 48 to 72 hours, and in some traditional Vietnamese operations, the process continues for as long as 96 hours without stopping, which pushes both labor and energy demands higher. As the steam carries the aromatic compounds upward, the oil separates during condensation, but the yield remains extremely small, and industry estimates suggest that about 70 kilograms of resinous wood produce only around 20 milliliters of high-grade oud oil. That is why it is often called liquid gold. The comparison to gold depends on which grade you are looking at. As of May 2026, gold trades at roughly $152,000 per kilogram, while pure oud oil on the legitimate market typically sells between $30,000 and $80,000 per kilogram, which places standard oud below gold when measured by weight. That changes completely at the top end. The highest grade carries a specific name. Kyara, known as Kynam in Vietnam, represents the rarest form of agarwood, and according to industry source Premier Po, it is traded for more than $10,000 per gram, which places it at roughly 70 times the gram price of gold. Singapore-based specialist Alan Mahaffey, speaking in the Al Jazeera documentary Sent from Heaven, described it as rarer than titanium, uranium, platinum, and even diamonds, with prices reaching $10,000 for a single gram. The numbers behind that rarity are difficult to ignore. Reports indicate that 2 kilograms of Kynam sold in Shanghai for around $18 million, while in Cambodia, inside a temple called Wat Bang Kradan, a 200-year-old Aquilaria tree received an offer of $23 million from Japanese buyers. That offer was rejected, and the tree remains protected under armed military guard. History places oud far beyond modern markets. References to aloes, the older name for agarwood, appear in the Hebrew Bible in texts such as the Song of Songs and the Book of Numbers, while the New Testament records Nicodemus bringing around 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes for burial rituals. In Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad spoke of aloe wood as containing cures for 7 diseases, which helped establish its cultural and medicinal significance across regions. Japan built an entire art form around it. Kodo, often translated as the way of incense, developed alongside tea ceremony and flower arrangement as one of the classical arts. And inside the Shosoin repository in Nara sits a single agarwood log known as ranjatai, weighing 11.5 kilograms and stretching over 1.5 meters in length. In July 2025, the Imperial Household Agency dated it to a tree felled between 772 and 885 CE. And across centuries, only 3 rulers were allowed to cut pieces from it, beginning with Shogun Yoshimasa in 1465, followed by Oda Nobunaga in 1574, and later Emperor Meiji in 1877. For most of history, oud remained concentrated in Asia and the Middle East, and that began to change in 2002. Yves Saint Laurent released a fragrance called M7, developed under creative director Tom Ford and composed by perfumers Alberto Morillas and Jacques Cavalier, marking the first major Western perfume centered on oud. Morillas later explained to Die Zeit that no one had used it before and few even understood it. And while M7 failed commercially, it opened the door. 5 years later, Tom Ford released Oud Wood under his own private blend collection, and this time the market responded. Major luxury houses followed quickly, including Dior, Creed, Maison Francis Kurkdjian, Amouage, Roja Parfums, Frederic Malle, and Jo Malone, each introducing their own oud-based fragrances, and prices reflected the demand. Tom Ford Oud Wood Parfume now retails at around $445 for 50 milliliters, while Maison Francis Kurkdjian's Oud Satin Mood sells for roughly $380. The reality behind those bottles is different from what most buyers assume. Many perfumes labeled as oud contain little to no real agarwood, relying instead on synthetic molecules developed by fragrance companies such as Firmenich, Givaudan, and IFF, which are designed to replicate the scent at a fraction of the cost. Industry source Aroma Paradise draws a clear line, stating that no fragrance under $200 contains real wild agarwood because the raw material alone exceeds $30,000 per kilogram. Even perfumers acknowledge the gap, with Killian Hennessy explaining to Bloomberg Pursuits that synthetic oud cannot fully recreate the complexity of the real material. Demand continues to rise, driven in part by younger buyers entering the fragrance market. According to Circana, fragrance became the fastest-growing prestige beauty category in 2024, expanding by around 12% year-over-year, and oud now sits at the center of that trend. All of this leads to a simple conclusion. Oud reaches extreme prices because of a chain of rare events that must happen in sequence, beginning with a specific tree, followed by a specific infection, then years or decades of resin formation, and finally skilled harvesting, soaking, distillation, and aging, with only a few drops emerging at the end. Supply keeps shrinking as wild trees disappear, Demand continues to expand across regions, and those two forces move in opposite directions. That is why a piece of infected wood, gram for gram, can cost more than gold. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you enjoy these deep dives into everyday products and hidden markets, make sure to subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.